Step out of the vehicle, now. Officer Ryan Whitaker snapped, his flashlight cutting through the dark like a blade of white fire, landing hard on the face of the man behind the wheel. The black SUV sat still at the curb, engine humming low, rainwater sliding down the doors and silver ribbons under the red and blue pulse of the cruiser lights. For one long second, nothing moved except the thin mist rising off the pavement and the glow from a coffee cup in the center console. Then the driver reached for the handle and opened the door with slow, deliberate calm. Elias Booker stepped out into the cold night air wearing a dark jacket, pressed slacks, and the kind of quiet expression that made angry men feel even louder. He was broad-shouldered, tired around the eyes, and perfectly steady, as if the storm of light around him belonged to somebody else. Ryan gave him a fast look from polished shoes to clean watch to the expensive SUV and let out a short laugh with no warmth in it. "Nice ride," he said, voice dry with suspicion. "Wrong driver for this neighborhood, though." The words landed in the wet air heavier than the rain. Across the street, the neon sign of a 24-hour pharmacy buzzed and flickered, staining the sidewalk blue. Somewhere down the block, a bus sighed to a stop and moved on. Elias kept his hands where they could be seen. He did not match Ryan's tone. He did not offer attitude. He did not offer fear either. "Officer," he said, low and even, "is there a reason I was pulled over?" Ryan ignored the question. His hand stayed near his belt while his flashlight moved again, sweeping across Elias's chest, then his face, then the inside of the SUV as if he had already decided what story he wanted the night to tell. The stop had happened less than a minute earlier, just after Elias turned off Lake Street and crossed into the wealthier side of the city where the trees were trimmed neat, the townhomes wore stone facades, and black men driving alone after midnight were too often treated like unanswered questions. Elias knew the look in Ryan's eyes before the officer even spoke. It was the look of a man who thought authority could stand in for proof. It was the look of somebody who had confused a badge with permission. Rain tapped softly against the hood. Water streamed along the gutter, carrying cigarette ash, leaves, and city dirt toward a storm drain half-block away. Ryan took one step closer, boots splashing through a shallow strip of runoff, and his expression sharpened when Elias did not shrink back. "License and registration," he said. Elias turned toward the open door. Ryan's voice rose instantly. "I did not tell you to reach for anything." Elias stopped, lifted one hand a few inches, then answered with the same careful calm. "My wallet is in the inside pocket of my jacket. Registration is in the glove compartment." Ryan stared at him for a moment, as if politeness itself felt like defiance. The patrol lights kept spinning, painting Elias in red, then blue, then red again, until his face looked carved from shadow and color. At the far corner, a young delivery driver on a scooter slowed and glanced over, phone already in hand, sensing what cities had taught people to sense. Ryan noticed none of it. Or maybe he noticed all of it and liked having an audience. He tipped his chin toward the SUV and smirked. "You federal guys always think the rules don't apply," he muttered, too early, too confident, too revealing. Elias's eyes narrowed just a fraction. He had not said a word about who he was. Not yet. And in that small mistake, hanging there under cold rain and hot lights, the night shifted almost invisibly in his favor. Ryan had no idea who he had pulled over. Worse, he had no idea who might already be watching. And before another minute passed, this quiet stop on a wet city block was about to become the kind of mistake a man never outran. Ryan heard the word federal and made the mistake of smiling at it, like he thought it was a bluff dressed in a calm voice. But Elias Booker had not built his life on bluffing, and that was the first difference between the two men standing under the rain. Elias had spent 15 years in rooms where panic ruined testimony, where one wrong word could fracture a case that took months to build, where the loudest person in the room was usually the least dangerous. He had learned to hold still when other men wanted a reaction. He had learned that silence, used correctly, could be stronger than rank. Tonight, silence was the only thing keeping this stop from turning into the exact kind of headline he had spent half his career cleaning up after. His fingers stayed open at his sides, relaxed but visible, while water collected along the edge of his sleeves and slipped off in cold drops. He was exhausted in the deep, clean way that comes after duty, not laziness. The kind that settled behind the eyes and in the lower back after too many miles, too much fluorescent light, too many hours holding the line for people who never saw the line at all. 3 hours earlier, he had signed the last transfer form on a witness relocation detail at the federal building downtown, then driven a protected asset to a secondary location outside the city, then doubled back alone in this borrowed SUV because the unit sedan assigned to him had gone into maintenance that morning. He had not changed clothes. His white shirt was still faintly creased under the jacket, collar softened by a full day of work, tie removed and folded beside a paper bag on the passenger seat. A stale cup of gas station coffee sat in the console, untouched for the last 40 minutes because he had wanted to reach home before the caffeine turned bitter on his tongue. Home, tonight, meant his mother's townhouse on the west side, where the porch light was always left on when he worked late and where a crock pot of stew would probably still be warm on the counter because she knew he forgot to eat when he was focused. Elias thought about that for half a second as the rain cooled the side of his face. It reminded him why he refused to let men like Ryan drag him out of himself. His mother had raised him in a narrow brick house with squeaky floors and clean windows, teaching him that dignity was not something the world handed over when it felt generous. Dignity was something you carried for yourself, especially when somebody tried to strip it from you in public. Ryan, meanwhile, saw none of that history. He saw the SUV, the watch, the pressed slacks, the measured posture, and he treated all of it as a challenge. To him, Elias looked too composed, too comfortable, too certain of his place. Men like Ryan could tolerate a black man being tired, or poor, or apologetic. What unsettled them was a black man who looked like he belonged exactly where he was. The flashlight beam landed again on the dashboard, then across the leather seats, then on the stack of folders clipped shut in the rear compartment. Ryan frowned. "You carrying case files in a civilian vehicle now?" he asked, trying to sound casual and failing. Elias did not answer the bait. The folders were sealed, marked, and fully authorized for transport under task force procedure, but none of that was information Ryan had earned. Across the street, the delivery girl had parked her scooter under an awning and was pretending to check her app while her camera stayed angled toward the stop. The pharmacy sign buzzed. A traffic light changed with no cars to obey it. Somewhere overhead, a jet crossed the cloud cover, invisible except for the muted growl rolling through the night. Elias could feel the city breathing around them, indifferent and watchful all at once. "Officer," he said again, steady as a courthouse clock, "if you tell me the reason for the stop, I will respond." Ryan tilted his head, rain clinging to his short hair, irritation rising because the conversation was not bending his way. "Your taillight looked dim when you turned off Lake Street," he said at last. It was weak, improvised, and they both knew it. Elias almost glanced back at the perfectly functioning rear lights glowing red in the wet reflection of the road, but he did not. He just nodded once, as if allowing Ryan room to hear himself. That calm landed harder than any argument could have. It suggested order. It suggested record. It suggested memory. And for the first time, a thin unease moved behind Ryan's eyes, because something about this man in the rain did not feel temporary. It felt like paperwork. It felt like consequences. And yet Ryan still did not stop. He took another step toward the open driver's door, toward the jacket pocket where Elias had said his wallet was, and the air between them tightened with the quiet, dangerous clarity of a moment that was about to choose a direction neither man would ever forget. Officer Ryan Whitaker had been wearing the uniform for just under 6 years, and in that time, he had learned something dangerous without ever saying it out loud. In this city, confidence was often mistaken for competence, especially when it came wrapped in a badge, a square jaw, and the right tone of command. He understood cameras long before he understood character. He knew how to stand with his shoulders wide when backup arrived, how to lower his voice when a supervisor stepped in, how to turn a routine stop into a story that sounded cleaner on paper than it looked in real life. Most of all, he knew how to read a neighborhood the way some men read a balance sheet. Here, under the trimmed maples and polished stone facades of North Crest, where porch lights glowed amber above expensive brass numbers and luxury sedans sat clean in narrow driveways, Ryan had built a private map in his mind of who looked expected and who did not. That map had nothing to do with law and everything to do with instinct sharpened by bias and rewarded by silence. The department did not call it that, of course. The reports never did. The report said proactive. The report said alert. The report said officer observed indicators of possible criminal behavior. But Ryan liked the feeling more than the language. He liked the small stage of a stop after midnight, the pulse of patrol lights against wet pavement, the knowledge that bystanders usually believe the uniform first. Tonight, the rain made the whole block gleam like a showroom floor, and the reflections doubled everything. The cruiser lights, the black SUV, the rigid line of Elias Booker's shoulders, even Ryan's own sense of authority staring back at him from the slick street. He glanced once toward the corner and saw the girl under the awning, phone tilted just high enough to catch the scene, and something in him sharpened instead of softened. That was the second difference between the two men. Elias became quieter when witnesses appeared. Ryan became more certain. He did not want an escalation. He wanted control to look visible. He wanted the stop to make sense to anyone who saw only the surface. So he leaned into the role he had written for himself, the hard cop in the hard moment, the gatekeeper of a neighborhood he had started to treat like personal property. His voice came out louder now, shaped for ears beyond Elias. You said your wallet is in your jacket, he said. Fine. Slowly. 2 fingers only. Elias did exactly that. No sudden movement, no edge in his face, just precise compliance under spinning light. Ryan watched him like a man hoping to catch a mistake, not prevent one. The wallet came free in dark leather, edges wet from the rain, and Elias held it out without drama. Ryan did not take it right away. He let the pause stretch, because pauses could humiliate when used correctly. Then he plucked it from Elias's hand, opened it under the flashlight beam, and flipped past ordinary cards with quick annoyance, as if disappointed that reality still had not matched the suspicion he preferred. From a nearby townhouse window, a curtain shifted. The city was watching now in tiny, private ways. Rain clicked softly on the hood of the SUV. The traffic signal at the far end of the block turned green for an empty lane. Ryan's radio crackled with another unit checking in 2 streets over, but he ignored it. He was too invested now, too deep inside the version of the night he had chosen. He glanced up at Elias with the expression of a man trying to reassert a lead he could feel slipping. You seem very calm for somebody being detained, he said. Elias met his eyes, tired but unwavering. That is because I know the difference between procedure and performance, officer. The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they landed with the clean force of truth. For half a beat, Ryan said nothing. Then color rose in his face, not from the cold, but from the fact that he had been seen clearly. And men like Ryan did not forgive that feeling. Not when the rain was falling, not when cameras were up, and not when the person seeing through them was a black man who refused to bend. The rain kept falling with that steady midnight patience that made every second feel polished and exposed, and Ryan Whitaker seemed to take Elias Booker's calm as a personal insult. He closed the wallet with a sharp flick of his hand and held it at his side instead of giving it back, as if keeping another man's property for a few extra seconds could restore the control slipping through his fingers. The patrol lights rolled over both men again, red then blue then red, turning the wet street into a stage neither of them had asked for in the same way. Elias could feel the weight of the moment settling deeper now. It was no longer just a stop. It was becoming a record. The delivery girl across the street had not moved. Her phone was still up, still angled, still quietly gathering the truth one frame at a time. A curtain on the second floor of the townhouse beside the pharmacy shifted again. Somewhere farther down the block, a dog barked once and stopped. The city had entered that strange state where it looked asleep and alert at the same time. Ryan tucked the wallet under one arm and nodded toward the open vehicle. Step back from the door, he said. I'm going to take a look inside. Elias turned his head just enough to follow the line of the officer's movement, but he did not step aside. His voice stayed level, stripped of ego, precise as a clean signature. Officer, you do not have consent to search my vehicle. Ryan gave a humorless smile. I do not need it if I think something is off. Elias held his gaze. Then you should be very sure of what you think you are doing. That answer landed harder than a refusal because it was not emotional. It sounded informed. It sounded measured. It sounded like the kind of sentence that survived in reports and hearings. Ryan's jaw tightened. He wanted resistance he could point to. He wanted attitude he could narrate. What he had instead was a man who understood process better than he did and was still giving him a chance to choose a safer road. Elias knew he could end this faster by reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket and showing the federal credentials resting there in a slim leather holder, but something in him resisted doing that too soon. Not from pride. From principle. He had seen too many men in authority treat courtesy as weakness until a title forced them to remember their manners. He wanted to know whether Ryan would correct himself because it was right or only because rank embarrassed him into it. The answer was arriving by the second. Ryan leaned toward the SUV and shined his light through the open door, across the center console, the dark dash, the folded tie on the passenger seat, the paper bag with a receipt sticking out, and then toward the clipped folders in the back. His expression changed when he saw them again. That was where his imagination wanted to live, in sealed edges, official paper, things that looked important enough to justify suspicion and ordinary enough to misunderstand. "What is in the back?" he asked. "Work," Elias said. "What kind of work?" "The kind you are making harder right now." For the first time, Ryan looked openly irritated by the possibility that this man might actually outrank the scene without saying so. He took a half step closer and lowered his voice, but not enough to keep the words private. "You think talking like that protects you?" Elias did not blink. "No, officer. Procedure protects everybody. Or it is supposed to." The sentence seemed to hang in the rain between them, quiet and undeniable. Ryan glanced toward the girl with the phone, then back to Elias, and something reckless settled into his face. He keyed his shoulder radio and called for a supervisor in a tone that tried to sound routine and came out strained. Elias heard the response crackle back through the static. Sergeant Dana Collins was en route. At that name, he felt the slightest shift in his chest, not relief exactly, but recognition. He knew Dana Collins by reputation from interagency briefings, careful, disciplined, not easily impressed by theater. Ryan did not know that. Ryan only knew he had committed himself too far to step back gracefully. He slid Elias's wallet onto the wet roof of the SUV, where water beaded around the leather edges, and squared his shoulders as though backup would make him right. Elias looked at the wallet, then at the spinning lights reflected in the glass storefront across the street, and finally back at Ryan. When he spoke again, his voice was almost gentle, which made it more devastating. "You still have time to slow this down." Ryan answered with the kind of confidence men borrow when they can feel it leaving them. "Save it for the sergeant," he said. Elias gave a small nod, not of surrender, but of conclusion. Because now the next person arriving on that street was not just another witness. She was the moment the night would stop belonging to Ryan Whitaker. The wait for Sergeant Dana Collins should have cooled the block down, but instead it tightened everything, drawing the air thinner, making the rain feel colder against Elias Booker's face. Officer Ryan Whitaker stayed close to the open driver's door, one hand near the frame, one shoulder squared toward the street, as if posture alone could turn assumption into fact. The wallet still sat on the roof of the SUV, dark leather surrounded by small beads of rainwater, and beside it the reflected patrol lights kept pulsing across the glass like a silent alarm. Elias did not reach for it. He did not remind Ryan to hand it back. He understood that moments like this were not only about what a man did. They were about what a man chose to keep doing after he had already been given a way out. Ryan had been given several. He had ignored every one of them. Another cruiser rolled slowly onto the block and stopped behind the first, headlights washing over the wet pavement in pale gold. The added light made the scene look even more public, more official, more fixed in memory. A younger officer stepped out, glanced from Ryan to Elias, then toward the girl under the awning with her phone raised at chest level. Her name, though neither officer knew it, was Naomi Reed. 19 years old, working a late food delivery shift to cover community college tuition, rain soaking the cuffs of her jeans while she kept filming because something inside her had recognized the shape of unfairness before the details were even clear. Ryan saw her again and lifted his chin with renewed hardness, performing certainty for every eye on the street. He moved to the rear door of the SUV and peered through the tinted glass at the clipped folders inside. Federal-style paperwork, sealed and stacked with a precision that should have made any careful officer pause, only seemed to provoke him further. He looked back at Elias with the expression of a man already writing his own report in his head. "You should have identified yourself sooner," he said. Elias answered without heat. "You did not ask who I was. You decided who I was." The younger officer glanced sideways at Ryan, just for a second, and that tiny flicker of doubt made Ryan stiffen. Men like him could tolerate scrutiny from above better than uncertainty from below. He stepped closer to Elias again, his voice louder now, shaped. As much for the second officer as for the witnesses. Until the sergeant gets here, you are being detained while I verify what is going on with this vehicle and those files. Elias let the words settle. Being detained. Verify. Vehicle. Files. He had heard language like that used as scaffolding before, ordinary terms stacked up to make something unstable sound proper. Around them, the city kept making small, indifferent sounds. Rain ticking off the hood. A distant train horn carrying through the damp night. The hum of power from the pharmacy sign. Somewhere inside the townhouse row, a television glowed blue behind half-drawn blinds. Life continuing while one man's ego tried to turn another man into a suspicion. Elias kept his shoulders loose, hands visible, breathing slow. His restraint was no longer only for himself. It was for Naomi's camera. For the younger officer learning what leadership looked like when it failed. For the report that would exist after the rain dried and the stories separated into truth and excuse. Ryan opened the rear door without permission, leaned in, and lifted one of the clipped folders just enough to see the sealed cover sheet beneath. His face shifted, not into understanding, but into irritation that the contents seemed official enough to make the moment complicated. That irritation pushed him into his worst instinct. He laid the folder back carelessly, then reached for the inside pocket of Elias's jacket with 2 fingers, intending to finally pull free whatever credentials this calm stranger had refused to wave around like a shield. Elias stepped back 1 pace, nothing sudden, just enough to reclaim the little space still left to him, and his voice dropped lower than before. Officer, do not make this uglier than it already is. For the first time all night, the words carried not warning alone, but disappointment. That was what made them heavy. Not fear, not anger. Disappointment, quiet and complete. Ryan heard it and flushed. Then a new set of headlights turned onto the block, slower than the others, steady and controlled, and the second the vehicle stopped, the whole temperature of the scene changed. Sergeant Dana Collins had arrived, and even before she stepped out into the rain, Ryan's borrowed certainty started to come apart. Sergeant Dana Collins stepped out of her unmarked unit with the kind of controlled energy that made noise feel unnecessary. The rain touched the shoulders of her dark jacket and rolled off without hurry as she took in the whole scene before saying a single word. The 2 patrol cars angled too sharply. The younger officer standing uncertain near the curb. Naomi Reed under the awning with her phone still raised. The rear door of the SUV open, the wallet resting on the roof in the rain. And Elias Booker standing beside it all with the stillness of a man who had already measured the cost of every second. Dana did not ask Ryan what happened first. She looked. That was the difference. Her eyes moved once across the block, reading posture, distance, light, and silence the way other people read text on a page. Ryan started talking before she reached him, his explanation arriving too fast, too eager, his voice trying to build order out of fragments. Suspicious vehicle. Possible inconsistency. Refusal to cooperate. Need to verify identity. Dana held up one hand, and he stopped mid-sentence. The motion was small, but the street abated. For a moment, all anyone could hear was the whisper of rain on steel and glass, the low idle of engines, and the soft electric buzz from the pharmacy sign across the street. Elias watched Dana's face and saw no rush to defend the uniform just because a uniform wore it. That alone changed the air. She walked past Ryan without brushing him, stepped to the side of the SUV, and looked down at the wallet on the roof. Water had darkened the leather to almost black. One corner was bent slightly upward by the wind, and beneath it the edge of a credential holder showed in a dull strip of gold and navy. Dana did not touch it right away. She looked at Elias first. Her expression shifted by half a degree, not into surprise, but recognition held in check. Marshal Booker, she said quietly. Elias gave one small nod. Sergeant. Ryan's face changed at the sound of the name. It did not collapse all at once. It tightened, then emptied, like a room losing air through a crack nobody else could see. The younger officer looked from one to the other and straightened instinctively. Across the street, Naomi lowered her phone by an inch, not because the tension had eased, but because it had changed shape. Dana picked up the wallet carefully, opened it under the wash of patrol light, and the badge inside caught the rain in a brief, hard flash. United States Marshal Service. The words seemed to brighten the whole block for a second, even though no one said them out loud. Dana flipped once to the identification card, then once more to the folded travel papers tucked behind it. Her eyes paused there. The crease between her brows deepened, not in confusion, but in realization. She closed the wallet and handed it back to Elias with both professionalism and something quieter, the sort of respect that comes from knowing exactly how close a situation has come to going irreparably wrong. Then she turned toward the open rear door and looked at the sealed folders Ryan had handled. The rain made a fine silver line along the edge of the nearest one. Dana did not lift it. She did not need to. Her gaze had already moved past the folder to the code on the transfer sheet visible beneath the clip, then to Elias again, connecting details in a pattern Ryan had never even noticed existed. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm enough to be mistaken for softness by anyone who did not understand consequences. Officer Whitaker stepped back from the vehicle. Ryan obeyed, but too late for obedience to help him. Dana's next words were lower, meant for him, Elias, and the night itself. "This is not a routine stop," she said. Then she looked directly at Elias, and for the first time his composure shifted, only slightly, because what he saw in her face was not just recognition of who he was. It was recognition of what this SUV, these folders, and this exact stretch of rain-slick street were connected to. When Dana spoke again, the sentence landed with enough quiet force to make even the rain seem to pause. "There is a federal operation attached to this vehicle," she said, and Officer Whitaker just interfered with it. For one suspended second, nobody moved. The rain kept sliding down the windshield in thin silver lines, but the street itself seemed to hold its breath around Sergeant Dana Collins's words. "A federal operation attached to this vehicle." Officer Ryan Whitaker just interfered with it. The sentence did not need volume. It carried its own weight. Ryan stood under the wash of cruiser lights, with the stunned expression of a man who had been walking on what he thought was solid ground only to hear it crack beneath him. His mouth opened, then shut again, as though language had suddenly become too small to help. Elias Booker took the wallet from Dana's hand and slipped it back into his jacket with the same measured calm he had held all night. But inside that calm something colder had settled. Not anger. Certainty. He had known the stop was wrong from the first flashlight beam, but now the wrongness had shape, paperwork, consequence, jurisdiction. Across the street, Naomi Reed raised her phone again without even realizing she had lowered it, her eyes moving from Ryan to Dana to Elias as the meaning of the scene rearranged itself in real time. The younger officer by the second cruiser looked down at the pavement for half a second, then back up, suddenly aware that he was standing inside the kind of moment officers remembered for years, either as a warning or a stain. Ryan found his voice first, but not his footing. "I did not know," he said, and the excuse sounded small the instant it entered the rain. Dana turned to face him fully. "You did not ask," she replied. Then she added, with the same controlled tone, "Dispatch sent out the interagency coordination notice at 6:14 this evening. Federal transport support. Restricted identifiers. Vehicle descriptions available to supervisors on request." Ryan's face lost what little color the cold had left him. The detail struck him harder than the title ever could. This was no longer a misunderstanding he could dress up as caution. He had ignored the possibility of protocol because his assumptions had felt easier to trust. Elias looked past him for a moment, toward the open rear door where the clipped folders still sat in the reflected red and blue light. Inside those folders were transfer papers tied to a cooperating witness chain, one small piece of a larger operation that had been moving quietly through the city for weeks. The location of the handoff had been adjusted twice that day. The SUV had been reassigned that afternoon. Elias had taken the wheel himself because the timetable had tightened and there was no room for delay. None of that was public. None of it needed to be. Yet because Ryan had wanted to play gatekeeper on a wet block after midnight, a line of federal movement had just been exposed to every lens and window nearby. Dana understood it all at once. That was why the disappointment in her face ran deeper than embarrassment. She was not just looking at a bad stop. She was looking at contamination. Ryan followed her gaze to the folders and finally seemed to understand that the damage was larger than his own pride. His shoulders sagged by an inch. He glanced toward Naomi, saw the phone, and knew the story had escaped him. It would not live only in a report now. It would live in footage, in timestamps, in the unblinking memory of strangers. His voice dropped. "Sergeant, I can fix this." Dana did not raise hers. "No," she said. "You cannot fix what already happened." She stepped toward the rear door and signaled the younger officer to secure the perimeter and log every unit present. Then she looked at Elias again, and this time her professionalism carried an undercurrent of apology the uniform itself could not quite speak. "Marshal Booker, is any part of your route compromised?" Elias answered after a brief glance down the street, measuring angles, witnesses, light, and time. "Potentially," he said. Enough for Dana to close her eyes for the shortest beat. When she opened them, Ryan was still standing there, rain on his face, career on a ledge, finally seeing the full shape of the man he had tried to reduce to a suspicion. Elias did not look triumphant. That was what made the moment unbearable. He looked tired. Tired in the way decent men look when they have been forced, yet again, to prove they belonged in the very space they were already protecting. And in that silence, with patrol lights turning over the wet street like a slow warning from heaven, Ryan understood something too late. He had not pulled over a stranger who needed to explain himself. He had stopped the man helping keep the city intact, and every wrong choice since then had been his own. Ryan Whitaker looked like a man trying to stand inside a uniform that no longer fit. The rain had softened his hair, darkened his collar, and taken the hard edges out of the scene, but it had not taken the truth with it. That stayed sharp. It hung in the air between the patrol lights and the open rear door of the SUV. Inside the silence, Naomi Reed's phone was still recording. Inside the careful stillness of Sergeant Dana Collins. And most of all inside the face of Elias Booker, who had every reason in the world to use this moment like a weapon and chose not to. Dana gave 2 quick instructions to the younger officer, one to widen the perimeter, one to note every minute that had passed since the stop began. Then she stepped slightly aside, giving Ryan just enough room to hear himself clearly. He swallowed once before speaking. "Marshal Booker, I did not know who you were." The sentence sounded rehearsed even though it was not, the first refuge of a man trying to shrink his choices down to one missing fact. Elias looked at him for a long second, rain cooling the side of his face, city light trembling in the puddles at his feet. Then he answered in the same low, even voice he had used all night. "That was never the real problem." Ryan blinked. The words landed harder than anger would have. They left nowhere to hide. Not behind confusion. Not behind procedure. Not behind ignorance. Because Elias was right. If Ryan had treated him with ordinary professionalism, it would not have mattered who he was. A tired black man in a quiet SUV should not have needed a federal badge to be handled with basic respect. The younger officer shifted his weight near the cruiser, hearing the lesson without being named in it. Naomi's phone remained steady under the awning. The city, in its own distant way, kept listening, tires hissing on a far avenue, the low roll of a train somewhere beyond downtown, the soft electric hum from the pharmacy sign staining the sidewalk blue. Ryan looked down at the wet pavement, and then back up, his voice smaller now, stripped of performance at last. "I was wrong." Elias studied him, not with triumph, but with the kind of weariness that comes from having seen this exact shape of moment too many times. Men apologizing only after rank appeared. Manners arriving late, dragged in by consequence. He could have humiliated Ryan then. He could have repeated the officer's own words back to him. "Nice ride. Wrong driver." He could have let the whole block watch Ryan come apart inch by inch. Instead, he reached past the bitterness the moment offered him and chose something harder. "Next time," he said, "be wrong sooner." Dana glanced at him, and for the first time that night the tension in her face shifted into something like respect touched by sorrow. She understood what that sentence cost. Mercy was often mistaken for softness by men who had never had the power to use it well. Ryan opened his mouth as if to answer, but nothing came. He had been spared humiliation, and somehow that made the shame settle deeper. Dana turned toward Naomi and asked, with calm professionalism, whether she was willing to preserve the footage if requested. Naomi nodded immediately, rain dripping from the edge of the awning beside her. Then Dana faced Ryan again. "Officer Whitaker, step back to your unit and wait there." He obeyed this time without argument. Not because rank forced him, because the night finally had. Elias moved to the SUV, checked the seal on the clipped folders, and closed the rear door with gentle care, as though restoring order to the one thing on the street that had never lost it. Dana stepped closer, lowering her voice. Internal Affairs will ask for your statement. So will Federal Liaison. Elias gave a small nod. I will give them facts. Nothing more. That answer, too, was a form of mercy. He was not interested in revenge. Revenge was loud, hungry, theatrical. What he wanted was something cleaner. Accurate records. Honest timestamps. A report that matched the rain-soaked truth. Dana seemed to understand. She looked once toward Ryan's cruiser, where he now sat motionless behind the windshield, face pale in the pulse of dashboard light, and then back to Elias. I am sorry, she said, the words simple and unadorned. Elias held her gaze for a beat. Then he nodded again, accepting the apology without pretending it repaired anything. Some things did not heal in a sentence. Some things only got named correctly and carried forward. Behind them, Naomi lowered her phone at last. The recording was over, but the damage was not. It had only changed hands. And as Elias reached for the driver's door, with rain still silvering the street and the first real quiet of the night settling over North Crest, Ryan Whitaker finally understood the shape of what was coming for him. Not rage. Not retaliation. Just the full, unbearable weight of his own actions, written down exactly as they happened. By the time dawn reached North Crest, the rain had already moved east, leaving the sidewalks washed clean and the streetlights dull against a pale gray morning. Nothing about the block looked dramatic anymore. The pharmacy sign was off. The puddles had thinned into dark patches. The windows that had held shadows and watchers in the night now reflected only the quiet geometry of trimmed hedges, parked cars, and clean stone facades. If someone had driven through at 7 in the morning, they would have seen nothing that suggested a man's career had started to come apart there a few hours earlier. That was how these moments often ended. Not with sirens or speeches. With paperwork. With silence. With a truth too plain to decorate. Elias Booker parked outside the federal building just after sunrise, the black SUV now exchanged for a plain government sedan that smelled faintly of coffee and vinyl. He sat for a second with both hands resting on the wheel, shoulders finally heavy with the fatigue he had held back all night. The city beyond the windshield was waking up in layers, delivery trucks backing into alleys, steam lifting from street grates, a jogger crossing against the light with headphones on, unaware that one bad stop and one small mercy had already changed the shape of 2 different lives before breakfast. Elias reached for the folder on the passenger seat, checked the seal one last time, and stepped out into the cool air. His shirt was fresh now, his tie straight, his shoes dry, but his face carried the same steady calm as the night before. He walked through the revolving doors, up the elevator, down a corridor of muted carpet and brushed steel, and into a conference room where Federal Liaison, Legal Review, and Internal Oversight were already waiting. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Naomi Reed's footage had been preserved with a clean timestamp. Dispatch logs confirmed the coordination notice had gone out at 6:14 the previous evening. Vehicle identifiers had been available. Supervisor access had existed. Body camera footage filled in the rest, not with dramatic revelations, but with the simple, devastating accumulation of tone, sequence, and choice. Elias gave his statement the same way he had lived the stop, precisely, without theater, without embellishment, each fact placed where it belonged. He did not speculate about Ryan Whitaker's intentions because he did not have to. The record spoke well enough on its own. Across town, in a precinct locker room that smelled of detergent, damp fabric, and old coffee, Ryan stood in front of a half-open metal locker with a cardboard box at his feet. His uniform shirt was pressed, but he was not wearing it. The badge stayed on the bench beside him, untouched, catching the fluorescent light in a way that looked colder than silver should. Suspension pending formal review. Administrative leave effective immediately. Firearm surrendered. Access revoked. Internal Affairs interview scheduled. The language on the notice had been dry, procedural, almost polite. That was the cruelty of institutions when they finally became honest. They did not shout. They recorded. Around him, the morning shift moved in careful quiet. A few officers glanced over, then away. One nodded once, not in support, not in judgment, just acknowledgement that everyone knew. Ryan placed a framed Academy photo into the box, then a spare notebook, then the nameplate from the locker door. His hands paused on that small strip of engraved metal longer than they had on anything else. Ryan Whitaker. The name looked ordinary enough to belong to somebody else. For the first time since the stop, there was no one left to perform for. No witnesses to persuade. No junior officer to impress. No black man standing calm in front of him to turn into a target for his assumptions. There was only the empty space where his certainty had been and the memory of one sentence that would not leave him alone. That was never the real problem. Back at the federal building, Elias signed the final page of his statement, slid the pen across the table, and stood. Sergeant Dana Collins was waiting just outside the room, coffee in one hand, apologies still sitting quietly in her eyes though she did not repeat it. She did not need to. Elias gave her a small nod as he passed. Mutual respect was all that fit the moment. He moved toward the exit corridor, morning light spilling in from the glass doors at the far end, thin and gold now instead of blue and red. He adjusted his cuff once, not out of vanity, but habit, then kept walking. No. Speech followed him. No music. No dramatic final look over the shoulder. Just the soft sound of polished shoes on stone and the hush of a building already moving on to the next duty. Outside, the wind lifted lightly through the plaza, stirring the flag above the entrance and carrying the clean smell of pavement after rain. Elias stepped into that light and did not slow down. Somewhere behind him, systems would review, signatures would collect, careers would bend under the weight of documented truth. But in front of him, the day was opening, plain and bright and undesigned. And that was the quiet justice of it. Not that one man had fallen. That another man, who had been doubted, delayed, and disrespected, never once let the world drag him beneath his own character. The city would forget the street by nightfall. The block would dry. The puddles would vanish. The footage would move from phone to file to archive. But for Ryan Whitaker, every morning after this one would begin with the same invisible thing, the knowledge that power had not left him because somebody destroyed it. It left because, when truth arrived under cold rain and patrol lights, he had shown exactly what he was. And for Elias Booker, the only sound that mattered now was the quiet ahead of him, the kind earned by men who do their job, tell the truth, and keep walking.